The shadow in the surveillance footage. What if the evidence you're presented with tells a story that's impossible to believe? What if a man simply vanishes from a locked building, but the security camera that captured his final moments shows something else entirely? Tonight, we're diving into a true-life mystery, so unsettling, it will make you question what you think is real. This is Tangled Logic, and today, we're going to untangle the terrifying case of the shadow in the surveillance footage. If this kind of mind-bending mystery is your thing, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss a single episode. The night of September 14th began just like any other. Arthur arrived at 10 p.m., signed in the logbook, and began his first round. The facility was an interconnected series of buildings, each housing top-secret projects that Arthur wasn't privy to and didn't care about. His only concern was that the doors were locked, the alarms were set, and the security systems were running smoothly. He made a point to check camera 47, which monitored a secluded access point to the Eastern Wing storage basement. This particular camera had been a recent addition, installed after a minor system upgrade, and Arthur found himself checking its feed with extra diligence, almost out of habit. It showed nothing but a dimly lit corridor, its stark white walls punctuated by heavy metal doors, completely undisturbed. Around 2:15 a.m., something broke his routine. A low-priority sensor alert pinged on his main console, indicating a possible malfunction in the Eastern Wing. He sighed, grabbed his radio, and began his walk towards the wing, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silent halls. This was not an unusual occurrence. Faulty sensors were a regular part of the job. He was not alarmed, just mildly annoyed at the interruption. As he approached the Eastern Wing, he called in his position, a simple formality that was more for his own sense of protocol than for any actual need. He was a solitary figure in a solitary place, and this was his world, predictable and safe. He would fix the sensor and be back at his desk in less than 20 minutes. The sensor was located near the access point monitored by camera 47. Arthur checked the wiring, and finding no obvious fault, he reset the system. As he was packing up his tools, he glanced down the corridor, the same one he had been watching on the monitor. The silence was absolute, a perfect vacuum of sound. But in the dim light at the very end of the hall, he thought he saw a movement. It was not a person, not a shadow cast by the lights, but something else entirely, subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air, a ripple in the stillness that seemed to swallow the light around it. He blinked, and it was gone. He dismissed it as a trick of the light, a consequence of his tired eyes. He shook his head, finished his work, and began his walk back to the security office. Back at his desk, Arthur went through his usual checks, but the image of the strange disturbance lingered in the back of his mind. He pulled up the live feed from camera 47, but the corridor was as still as a painting. He then rewound the footage, meticulously reviewing the moments before and during his visit. He watched himself walk down the corridor, saw the brief pause as he fixed the sensor, and then his walk back. Everything seemed normal, except for one small detail. In the moments he was working on the sensor, something appeared on the footage. A dark, amorphous shape, a smear of shadow, seemed to materialize at the very end of the hallway, exactly where he had seen the movement. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, like ink spreading in water. It was not a person, and it had no discernible features, just an absence of light. The shadow in the footage was faint, almost a visual anomaly, but it was there. It seemed to pulse, its edges wavering as if it were a digital glitch. Arthur watched the footage again, this time with a magnifying glass on the screen. The shadow was distinct. It stayed at the end of the hall for a few seconds, then seemed to shift, slowly sliding down the wall toward Arthur. Arthur, on the footage, was oblivious, his back to the strange anomaly as he worked on the sensor. The shadow grew larger, filling more of the frame, and as it neared the bend in the corridor, it seemed to dissipate entirely, as if it had never been there. He rewound the tape one more time, his heart now thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was not a glitch. This was real. A wave of cold dread washed over him. He felt a profound sense of isolation, alone in the dead of night with something that defied all explanation. He grabbed his radio, his hands shaking, and tried to call for a supervisor, but no one answered. The radio was a dead channel. He was about to use the landline when he saw it. The shadow was back on camera 47, this time much closer to the camera. It was now at the far end of the hall where Arthur had first seen it, but it was clearer, more defined. It was not just an absence of light. It was a figure, tall and gaunt, with long, spindly limbs. It moved with a jerky, unnatural motion, almost like a stop-motion animation. It seemed to be looking directly at the camera, its form rippling and shifting in the dim light. Arthur froze, unable to move, his eyes glued to the monitor. He saw the figure lift what looked like a long arm, pointing it directly at him, or rather, at the camera that was watching him. A deep, guttural sound, like static on a radio, began to emanate from his console speakers. It was a distorted, unintelligible noise that seemed to claw its way into his very bones. The figure on the screen began to walk, its movements still disjointed and wrong, but with a terrifying sense of purpose. It was no longer just a shadow. It was a presence, and it was coming for him. Arthur knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he had to get out of there, that this was not a matter of a faulty sensor or a harmless glitch. This was something else entirely. He stood up, grabbing his keys and radio, his mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. He had to run, to get to the main gate, to escape. But as he turned to leave the security office, a sudden blinding flash of light from outside the window stopped him in his tracks. He stumbled back, his hands covering his eyes, and when the light subsided, he looked out the window. The forest was gone. Instead of the familiar dark expanse of trees, he saw a swirling vortex of black and gray, like a storm cloud of pure darkness. It was silent, but it felt alive, pulling at the very air around him. He turned back to the monitor, and the figure on the screen was gone, replaced by a single, pulsing red dot at the center of the screen, an ominous, silent heartbeat. He was trapped. The forest outside was no longer a forest, and the facility was no longer just a facility. He felt a profound sense of disorientation, as if the rules of reality had been rewritten. He looked at the console, and the red dot on the screen grew brighter, the static on his radio console growing louder and more insistent. A deafening white noise that seemed to fill every corner of the room. He realized that this was not just a strange event. It was a purposeful one. He was being hunted, and his only hope was to find a way out, to find an escape from the silent, predatory shadow that had found him. He knew that the only way to survive was to face the fear, to find an answer, to break the logic of the situation. He began to run. He ran back down the corridor, the one he had just come from, the one where he had seen the shadow. He didn't know where he was going, but his instincts told him to get away from the security office. From the pulsing red dot and the static, he passed camera 47, now a lifeless eye in the wall, and continued running, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He ran down a series of identical corridors, past sterile laboratories and closed doors, but he felt a sense of being watched, of being followed. He could feel the cold presence of the shadow behind him, a suffocating weight on his back. He didn't dare look back, because he knew that if he did, he would see it, and it would be the last thing he ever saw. He just ran. He found himself in the main atrium, a large, open space that was usually flooded with natural light during the day. Now, it was a dark, cavernous space, the high ceilings lost in the shadows. He looked up at the atrium's large skylight, but instead of the night sky, he saw the same swirling vortex he had seen outside the window. The skylight was a portal, a window into a place that was not his world. He heard a noise, a low moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, and he looked down to see the shadow, now fully formed, standing in the middle of the atrium floor. It was a towering, skeletal figure, its form twisting and writhing as if in perpetual agony. Its head was a featureless black void, and its spindly arms ended in long, sharp claws. The shadow lunged forward, its movements now fast and fluid. And Arthur sprinted for the nearest door, a service entrance to the facility's lower levels. He fumbled with the handle, his hands slick with sweat, but the door was locked. He pounded on it, screaming for help, but there was no one to hear him. He looked back, and the shadow was right behind him, its head tilting to the side as if in curiosity. He could feel its cold, silent presence, and he knew that his time was up. He closed his eyes and braced himself for the end. The last thing he heard was a deafening silence, and then nothing. He just disappeared. The next morning, the facility was discovered empty. The night shift was missing. The police were called in, and they found Arthur's security console abandoned, his keys and radio lying on the desk. They checked the cameras, and they found the footage of Arthur's last moments. They saw him running through the corridors, his terrified face a blur of motion, and they saw him stop at the atrium. But when they looked at the atrium camera feed, they saw nothing. The atrium was empty, the skylight perfectly normal, the doors securely locked. The footage showed Arthur disappearing into thin air, as if he had been erased from existence. There was no shadow, no figure, no vortex, just a man running from something that wasn't there. The police were baffled. They had a man, a meticulous, reliable man, who had seemingly vanished without a trace. And the only evidence they had was surveillance footage that showed him running from nothing. The official report declared him a missing person, and the case went cold. But the investigators, in their private conversations, couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. They had replayed the footage hundreds of times, and every single time they saw the man, a real, physical man, running from an empty space. It was a ghost story with a living victim, a mystery without a motive, a crime without a criminal. The evidence was irrefutable, but the conclusion was impossible. One young detective, a man named Miller, was obsessed with the case. He spent weeks poring over the footage, looking for a clue, a detail, anything that would make sense. He noticed something strange on the playback. In the moments Arthur was running past the atrium, Miller saw a brief, almost imperceptible flicker in the reflection of a polished metal surface on one of the doors. He slowed the video down frame by frame, and what he saw made the blood run cold in his veins. In the reflection, he didn't see Arthur's reflection, but a brief, warped image of the shadow. It was not a ghost, it was not a trick of the light. It was real, and it was watching him. The reflection of the shadow was a fleeting glimpse into another reality, a horrifying, silent presence that was not supposed to be there. Miller froze, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the warped skeletal form of the shadow in the reflection. It was standing right behind Arthur, its spindly arms outstretched, its head a featureless void. And then, as Arthur ran past the door, the reflection of the shadow disappeared, as if it had never been there. The original footage of the atrium showed nothing, but the reflection showed everything. The shadow was a silent hunter, a predator that could hide in plain sight, a being that could exist outside the very rules of reality. Miller tried to show the footage to his superiors, but the reflection was so faint, so fleeting, that they dismissed it as a digital artifact, a result of a low-quality camera and a distorted angle. They told him to drop the case, to let it go, that Arthur Finch was a simple missing person case, and there was nothing more to it. Miller knew better. He knew that the shadow was real, that it was a force of pure, incomprehensible evil, and that it was still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. He resigned from the force, unable to live with the knowledge of what he had seen. He was haunted by the image, by the idea that there was a predator that could hunt in the dark and disappear in the light. And so, the case of Arthur Finch remains unsolved, a chilling testament to the unknown. The police, the public, and even Arthur's family believe he simply walked away from his life, but Miller knows the truth. He knows that the shadow is real, that it is a thing of pure malevolence, and that it is still out there, lurking in the shadows of our world, waiting for its next victim. The surveillance footage, once a simple record of a night's work, is now a silent, terrifying chronicle of a man's final moments, a chilling reminder that some things cannot be explained, and that the things that go bump in the night are not just figments of our imagination, but a reality that is just beyond the veil of our perception. The story of Arthur Finch is a chilling reminder that there are some things that logic simply cannot explain, and that the most terrifying truths are the ones that we can't see, but that can see us. If you enjoyed this mystery, hit like and subscribe for more strange, true stories from Tangled Logic.